capacity building. So we have trained, I think, something like 110,000 different law enforcement officers on active shooter response. We have put out a whole bunch of different PSAs and instructional videos to schools, to school resource officers, to school administrators, to houses of worship, to communities, as well as to law enforcement, to help them better defend. And there's a host of information in there. In addition to that, we're obviously providing forensic support through our lab. We're doing shooting incident reconstruction. I mentioned in my opening statement, in Uvalde, we have evidence response. That's often one of the things that we are quickly asked to provide by our state and local partners. But that's, of course, after the fact. And what we're trying to do is figure out how to better get in front of it.
We'd welcome your advice and suggestions. Last year in this room, you and I spoke at least briefly about counterintelligence threats along the southern border. 2 weeks earlier, I'd had the opportunity to question the Attorney General about the cartel's activities there. The purpose of those questions a year ago were to address what I'd learned on my visits to McAllen, Texas, that last year, that just previous to those hearings. Which is, while immigration dominates the conversation about the southern border, there are also grave national security threats there. This was confirmed just yesterday when an FBI search warrant unsealed in Ohio revealed that an assassination plot against former President George W. Bush included plans to smuggle assassins into the United States from Mexico. According to press reports, the suspect, an ISIS operative, was recorded claiming to have just smuggled 2 individuals associated with Hezbollah into the United States. Yesterday's events compel me to start again on this topic that we discussed last year. What's the FBI's assessment of our national security threats along our border, southern border in particular, but borders generally? And what can you tell us in this setting about the number of known or suspected terrorists or special interest aliens who have crossed into the United States from Mexico?
Well, certainly border security is a major challenge that cuts across a whole host of the programs that we serve. And the national security piece of it that you're highlighting is one part of it. Obviously, I'm very proud of the work that our folks did on the Ohio case that you mentioned. We obviously work closely with Secret Service on that to coordinate that, to make sure that it was all done in a way that prevented any true threat from coming to fruition. Certainly any porous point of entry is a potential vulnerability that bad actors of all sorts, including national security threats, can seek to exploit. And I've been down to all of our field offices that have border crossings as part of their area of responsibility. I've had CBP folks show me around so I can see firsthand what they're dealing with, and they have a heck of a challenge on their hands. And we, through our joint terrorism task forces in particular, work very closely with our DHS partners to try to bring the counterterrorism dimension to the threat. I think that's probably all I would be able to say about it in an open hearing. But certainly you're right to be focused on it as an issue of concern.
Perhaps we'll have the chance to have a closed session as well. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator Kennedy.
Mr. Director, I remember when you were nominated and confirmed. Boy, was I glad to see you. I believe then and I believe now that you're not a politician. I think your predecessor was. And he and others did immeasurable damage to one of the most important institutions in American government. Because I believe, as you do, that in addition to the DEA, the FBI is probably the premier law enforcement agency in all of human history, and it should be above politics. For the record, who is Michael Sussman?
Well, Michael Sussman is a lawyer who is currently involved in a trial by the Durham Special Counsel team.
His law firm, Perkins Coie, was counsel to Secretary Hillary Clinton's campaign, right?
Senator, I'm mindful, as I think you would expect me to be, that the case is currently in the middle of trial, and well, we have agents, and I have assigned agents to work on the Durham team. I want to be really, really careful about not getting into a discussion about a case that's currently in front of a very independent and strong-willed federal judge and a jury right now. So,
well, Mr. Sussman was counsel to Secretary Clinton's campaign, and we also know that he was the source of the information provided to the FBI that the Trump campaign had a back-channel communication to Russia, which we now know isn't true. Is it true that Michael Sussman, a partner at Perkins Coie, counsel to the Hillary Clinton campaign, and the source of this information about the allegations regarding the Trump campaign, is it true that he had a badge that gave, an FBI headquarters badge that gave him special privileges in entering the FBI building?
well, Senator, what I would say to you is much in keeping with the gracious comments you made at the beginning about my commitment to trying to make sure I do this job the right way. That includes making sure that with a case that is currently in the middle of trial and an investigation being run by Mr. Durham that we are actively helping him with. I don't think I can really get into a discussion of those topics at the moment.
When the FBI opened a file to investigate Mr. Sussman's allegations, is it true that the FBI concealed Mr. Sussman's identity?
Again, I completely understand your interest in the question, and I respect it, and I just hope you will respect the fact that because I've got agents working with Mr. Durham on the case and they're in the middle of trial right now, I just don't think I can get into a discussion of that here.
When the FBI opened its file to investigate the allegations that Mr. Sussman, on behalf of the Clinton campaign, made, now known to be untrue, about these back-channel communications between the Trump campaign and Russia. When the FBI opened the file, is it true that the file said the source of this information was not Mr. Sussman, but the Department of Justice?
Again, the same response. These are the very kinds of questions that are being litigated in front of the jury and Judge Cooper right now.
Senator Kennedy, I would just urge you to follow a separate line of questioning. As Director Reyes said, he's not going to answer questions relative to this case that's being litigated.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair, and you know how much I respect you. I want my time back, by the way.
You can have those 3 seconds that I
No,
took.
you talked for about 10 seconds.
I'm happy to give you those 10 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your help with my questions, but I can handle it myself. Chris, at some point you're going to have to address this, and I understand you don't want to address it in the middle of a prosecution, but there are millions of Americans that look at this and think, I'm not saying they're correct, that the FBI has become a political organization, and at some point you're going to have to address that. The institution is just too important. And some of my colleagues may not want to talk about this, but we're going to have to talk about it at some point.
Well, So first off, I totally appreciate your concern about our institution, and I will tell you that what I can speak to now is that I have implemented all sorts of reforms that I've spoken about quite publicly, over 40-plus corrective measures that deal with a lot of the same issues that are at the heart of the underlying investigation. I completely turned over the entire leadership team in the FBI. We've taken disciplinary action where we could, but we've also been in close cooperation and coordination with Mr. Durham, who is the special counsel, and I think that's the best thing I can do to help address the concerns you're talking about. As to the FBI's reputation, I will tell you, having been to all 56 of our field offices, now almost all of them twice, having been to New Orleans just earlier this month and Baton Rouge just shortly before that, what I find in talking to Americans out in the field, law enforcement partners, business leaders, community leaders, victims, prosecutors, families, is a widespread, even resounding appreciation and respect for the men and women of the FBI. And you will be, I hope, relieved to know that in Louisiana, over the last 3 years, last two and a half years, the number of people in Louisiana applying to be special agents of the FBI has doubled what it was in the first few years when I took over. And so I think that speaks very well of the good citizens of Louisiana and their appreciation and view of the FBI's credibility.
And I thank you for coming, Chris, and I thank you for all the hard work you've done. But I'm going to stand by my comments. I think at the right time you're going to have to address this and assure the American people that,
Senator Hagerty,
that the rot is gone. Thank you. Thanks for being here, Chris.
Thank you, Chairwoman Sheen. And Director Wray, it's good to see you here again. I'd like to turn my comments to something very disturbing that's happening right now with respect to the Supreme Court justices. And what we've seen in recent weeks are protests at the homes of Supreme Court justices and their families, something that I think that should be completely out of bounds. It also may be illegal. Federal law prohibits protesting at the residence of a judge with the intent of influencing the judge. And many of the protesters are doing just that, protesting outside judges' homes, attempting to intimidate them, I think, into changing their ruling on the Dobbs case. So, Director Wray, is the FBI in any way investigating these protesters as a potential crime?
So I don't want to get into any particular predicated assessment or investigation that we may have ongoing right now. I will say that we're working very closely with the U.S. Marshals, who, as you may know, are now providing round-the-clock security at the justices' homes, and with the Supreme Court Marshal and Supreme Court Police. Together, they have responsibility for protection of the judges themselves and their facilities. But I will tell you this, my view and my instructions to the FBI are that there is a right way and a wrong way in our system and under the Constitution to express what you're upset about and who you're upset with. And violence and threats of violence, no matter what you're upset about or who you're upset with, is not the way to go.
I couldn't agree with you more.
We will pursue all lawful, predicated investigations we can to ensure that.
The U.S. Supreme Court Police recently reported, I'm going to use their quote, a significant increase in violent threats to your concern against Supreme Court justices and the Supreme Court building. And as FBI director, it sounds, and I just wanted you to confirm that you've received information that the Supreme Court and its members are facing elevated threats that do warrant increased security, intelligence, and intelligence resources.
As I said, we're in close contact with them, receiving tips and leads and things like that from them, and without, again, weighing in on what in the way of assessments and investigations we have open. But my charge to our people is that we are going to aggressively pursue violence and threats of violence against public officials, including against judges.
I appreciate that, Director Wray, and I think I share your concerns, and I think that many on our committee. I am working here on our side to make certain that, along with the extra help that the U.S. Marshals are providing right now, that if there's any shortfall in monetary resources needed, particularly in the very near term, to make certain that the justices and their families are properly protected, that we address that, because heaven forbid these threats turn into or manifest themselves into the violence that I think concerns us both. I'd like to turn to another issue now. That's at our southern